video. This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing Social. Delighted to be joined here today. We're down at the Lamex Stadium, the rather lovely Lamex Stadium in Stevenage, by John Rawling. How are you, John?
Good. It's not a bad venue, is it? I mean, when you get 10,000 people in here with seats on the pitch and the place packed out, which I think it's going to be on the 18th of May, all you need is a nice fine day, and which of course it will be, and you know, you've got something a little bit different, and I think people will turn out in numbers.
John Rawling, broadcaster, commentator, and now weatherman. Interesting one there. Talk to me about the fight. Billy Joe Saunders contests for the interim at the minute WBO super middleweight title against Shefat Isufi.
Yeah, well, Ramirez is the WBO champion right now, but they're talking about him going up and fighting at light heavyweight, which he may or may not do, but at the moment he's not relinquished the title as yet. But it's a win-win situation for Billy Joe in the super middleweight division. If Ramirez decides he's going to hang on to that title, then Billy, provided he gets through the fight, would be in a mandatory position to take that one. And if not, he'd be installed as the full champion, and he's always got the option to come back down to middleweight if he thinks that there are big fights out there. But first of all, he's got to get past this fella who can bang a bit.
Yeah, I think Gilberto Ramirez is boxing Tommy Carpentry at light heavyweight. I think general consensus is he's likely, all being well, to move to light heavyweight, which then would make this for the full title. Do you know anything about Shefat Isufi? I'm not massively well versed in him, I must admit. You're a much more learned man than I am.
I'm not particularly learned. I mean, it's only what I've been told and what I've been able to glean from the internet. I've not seen him fight live. And oh, hello, here we go. I thought I was about to get assaulted there. What I do know is that he's come down from cruiserweight, and you could see when they were standing head to head, he's physically a bit bigger framed than Billy. He's a big lad. He's a puncher. I think he's won 15 of his last 16. He's got he's renowned as being a hitter. Whether or not he's got the speed to cope with Billy, well, that remains to be seen, because Saunders at his best, we know, is a very, very mobile and skillful, tricky fighter. You know, so it's going to be the boxer against the puncher, as is often the case when Billy Joe's in the ring.
Well, we've seen fighters over the years move up in weight, move down in weight. Barring Billy Joe's last fight, in which I think he came in technically as a cruiserweight, he has been a career middleweight. How do you think the extra weight will help or hinder him in this fight? I
don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference. I mean, I see Billy really as a middleweight. But I think he's moved to this because it's an opportunity. He's been frustrated at middleweight trying to nail down a fight against Golovkin or Alvarez or I suppose Jacobs. You know, I mean, there are big fights out there, but nobody has really fancied getting in the ring against Billy Joe Saunders. He's moving up to super middleweight now, as much out of ambition and frustration. I think they've both been factors. Long term, whether he stays at super middleweight, that remains to be seen. But there are lots of fights out there. I mean, everybody still talks about a Eubank fight. There's Callum Smith out there. There are fights to be made. He's said that he's got 2 years at the top left, and he wants to show in that time just how good he is. Because I think, to an extent, he's been a little bit of not a hidden talent, but he's not, in my opinion, had the nationwide acclaim that a talent such as he's got really deserves.
What do you think that is? I mean, he has been inactive in his career. He also served a doping ban very recently. What do you think it is about Billy Joe's career? It's been very much stop-start, and we haven't really seen the best of him. It's only been sporadically, obviously, the performance against David Lemieux, but hasn't really capitalised on that since.
Well, he's had injuries, hasn't he? I think there was talk of him fighting Martin Murray, which didn't happen. There was talk of him fighting Golovkin. In fact, he was signed to fight Golovkin, and that fell through. And then there's been his problems away from the ring, which to an extent have been of his own making. And I think he'd admit he's been foolish, and he's not made the most of what he's had. He's trying to put all that behind him, and trying to say, look, I'm going to go from here. As Tyson Fury did. They're good friends, and I think he's trying to put his crazy days behind him and show that as a professional sportsman that he's a special talent.
Just moving away from this fight, saw you attracted a little bit of criticism for the Josh Warrington Kid Galahad press conference. You're not somebody who I'm sort of familiar with seeing to be criticised. What did you make of that?
I'd defend, presumably, I mean, what are you saying? That I shouldn't have been talking about the drugs ban?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that other people criticised you.
The reason that came up was because speaking to Josh Warrington and to his father, Sean, beforehand, they were saying it was a factor, even though Kid Galahad was banned and served out the ban. He'd said some pretty damning things beforehand, Josh Warrington, as indeed had Carl Frampton. And I think when things are in the public domain, I'd have been selling fight fans short if I hadn't asked those questions. I mean, I don't think that Dominic Ingle was surprised to be asked, and I don't think that Kid Galahad was surprised to be asked. Yes, of course, it's 5 years ago, and it's in the past. He served his ban and he moves on, but it's still a talking point. And people have said to me, or I've read online, people would say, well, ask Tyson Fury next time. If people were making that an issue, if the guy he's fighting makes it an issue, then yes, I would ask the question. I don't, all I'm doing is asking the questions which are pertinent to a given fight, and I defend the way in which that press conference went, 100%.
Some people would point to even Billy Joe Saunders. I mean, Billy Joe Saunders had his doping infractions in the past, and kind of, you've mentioned the Tyson Fury one recently. Do you kind of see people's point of view? I mean, I don't believe you asked Billy Joe about it today at the press conference.
There's a difference between being banned for something which is a borderline stimulant, which according to British rules he wouldn't have tested positive for. There's a heck of a lot of difference between that, which is something which is basically ephedrine based. There's a lot of difference between that and taking something which is a full-on anabolic steroid.
Do you think Kid Galahad is kind of revelling in his position as the bad guy? He seemed to not really mind the accusations being thrown his way. He seemed to, if not, as I say, kind of relish it.
Hey, listen, you've been around the sport long enough. It's always a case of any publicity is good publicity, isn't it? You know, Don King at his height used to say, people, I can remember quoting him on this, that and the other, and sometimes saying things about him. And people would say, for the paper I was working for at the time and for the BBC when I was working for them, they'd say, are you sure you can say that? And Don used to always say, any publicity is good publicity. It's the P.T. Barnum effect, and all he'd say is spell my name right. And if people are talking about the fight, and if people want to make that as an issue and make it good guy versus bad guy, then that has to be good. Do you know they sold over 2,000 tickets in the first hour after they went on sale on Friday for Warrington against Kid Galahad? So people are talking about the fight, and for boxing that has to be good, doesn't it? I believe so. I mean, I think that I would defend that press conference 100% because it got people talking about it who maybe otherwise wouldn't have been talking about it, and it's become good guy versus bad guy, if you like. And Kid Galahad won't care. He thinks he's going to win the fight. He thinks he's got the style to win it. They really believe that, and maybe he's right. Who knows?
How difficult a fight is that for Josh Warrington? He had a terrific year last year in both his wins over Lee Selby and Carl Frampton. Kid Galahad, very different proposition altogether, very tricky fighter. Yeah. Is this the most difficult out of those three fights?
It's certainly different, and it's certainly difficult. And a problem behind the scenes might be that Josh was thinking, I'm going to be going to America now, I'm going to fight Oscar Valdez, I'm going to look for Santa Cruz, you know. That's not happened. Instead, he's got to have his IBF mandatory against Kid Galahad. So that's difficult for him. He's got to be focused on this. He can't afford to look past what's in front of him. But you know, anybody who follows boxing knows that Galahad is awkward. He's a tricky fighter. He's a good fighter. He's undefeated, and he's got into the mandatory position for a reason. And it's no pushover for Josh Warrington. That's a proper fight.
Now you mentioned kind of Josh Warrington potentially going over to America. One person who is going over to America, well, he's already been, but is going back. Tyson Fury recently announced his fight with Tom Schwartz. Just your thoughts on that fight?
Well, it's not the fight that people would have hoped for, first of all, and you can't dress it up any otherwise. It's a fight which Tyson Fury ought to win, and ought to win handily against a fairly rugged, inexperienced boxer. It's going to project him towards again the American public, fighting in Las Vegas for the first time. His fans are going to get a great opportunity to go over to Vegas and watch him in action there. But I don't think that the Deontay Wilder fight has gone away. Deontay Wilder has not tied himself into any long-term deal with anybody, so the fight can still be made. And I'm always a believer that if the fight is big enough, the fight will happen. And I think if Tyson Fury can get past his German challenger in June, which I think he will do, then I think that the Deontay Wilder fight is still a very real possibility, maybe for later this year.
What do you make of kind of the seemingly a little bit of a mini exodus at the minute with obviously the American TV or the streaming money that's come in? You've seen Tyson Fury, Carl Frampton, another one. Billy Joe Saunders heavily rumoured to be signing a deal with ESPN, kind of leaving us a little bit without our stars on these shores. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's money talks, isn't it? But it becomes an increasingly small world, doesn't it? You know, it's not ideal for some of the fans, but there were thousands and thousands in Los Angeles to watch Tyson Fury in December. You know, it doesn't cost the earth to get over there, and I think if people are really into their boxing, they'll go across anyway. You know, wouldn't you look forward to a trip over to Las Vegas or to Madison Square Garden to see Amir Khan? You know, these are trips which fight fans will welcome. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Just finally, this past weekend we saw one of the most dramatic come-from-behind victories in many a year on these shores with Sam Maxwell's win. You were there, very famously commentated. I think I've listened to that about 10-15 times. Just how big of a shock was that, the Sam Maxwell's final round come-from-behind knockout?
Well, I think you could hear it in my voice, couldn't you? He looked as though he'd had a rough night, that he was at very best going to scrape through on a controversial points decision, and he looked pretty much spent. I mean, he got clipped in that last round. The French guy decided to showboat rather than jump all over him, and he gave all the oh, you've really hurt me, haven't you? No, no, I've done it once. That'll do. But yeah, what a shot! And Sam's a popular guy in Merseyside, and he'll be an awful lot more popular now because that clip absolutely went viral. I think the BT boys were telling me that there's been north side of 3 million people who've seen that one. So there were 2 shows on the night, but I think the big headline moment of either show was that one. You know, Sam throwing that punch when he could conceivably have been on his way to defeat. To turn it round like that was amazing. Great shot.
There's also the Frank Warren reaction where he kind of levitated off his seat, which was very interesting.
He looked like Billy Graham, didn't he? I've seen the lights.
Okay, well, John Rawling, always a pleasure catching up with you. Thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
My pleasure.
Cheers, John. Thanks, mate.